My name is Josephine Caraway, and the day I got married was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I always imagined looking into the crowd and seeing my parents smiling with pride. I thought they would be there when I walked down the aisle, holding back tears and celebrating the woman I had become. But when the wedding day arrived, the two people I wanted to see the most were missing. Their empty seats felt louder than anything else around me. I could hear the music, see the guests, and feel everyone's excitement, but a part of me was still waiting for the doors to open. A small part of me hoped my parents would walk in at the last second and tell me they had changed their minds, but they never came. I remember the way the string quartet kept playing even as my eyes kept drifting toward the back of the venue, and how one of the bridesmaids squeezed my hand a little tighter every time the doors stayed shut. Everyone else around me seemed to float through the day untouched by what I was carrying, and I remember thinking that grief has a strange way of showing up in the middle of celebration, quiet and uninvited, sitting right beside you while everyone else only sees the smile on your face. For years, I had tried to convince myself that my relationship with my parents was normal. I believed that if I worked harder, stayed useful, and made myself valuable enough, things would finally change. I was the daughter who never asked for anything. I avoided arguments, helped whenever they needed me, and always tried to keep peace in the family. Growing up, I noticed the difference between how my parents treated me and how they treated my older brother, Desmond. He was being groomed to take over the family logistics company. While my efforts often went unnoticed, when he needed anything, tuition, connections, a second chance, my parents were always there. When I needed support, I usually had to handle things on my own. I never complained because I wanted to believe they loved me in their own way, even if their attention always seemed to point toward him. Looking back, I think I understood the shape of it long before I had the words for it, the way conversations at dinner would drift toward Desmond's latest project. The moment I tried to bring up something of my own, the way my accomplishments were acknowledged and then quietly set aside while his were revisited for weeks. When I met Theo Lindqvist, everything started to feel different. He saw my patience, my quiet strength, and the parts of me my own family had stopped noticing. He noticed small things too. The way I'd go quiet after phone calls with my mother. The way I'd downplay my own accomplishments before anyone else could. Instead of letting those moments pass, he'd ask about them gently, without pushing, and slowly I found myself telling him things I had never said out loud to anyone. With him, I didn't feel like I had to prove my worth. I felt seen. When we decided to get married, I truly believed my parents would finally step back from the business long enough to be proud of me for something that had nothing to do with the company. I thought this would be the moment our family came together. But 6 days before the wedding, everything changed. My parents sat me down and told me they would not attend. Their words felt impossible to understand. They said they couldn't support my decision and believed they were protecting the family. I remember sitting there silently, trying to process how the people who raised me could choose to miss such an important moment. I cried. I questioned myself, and I wondered if I had done something wrong. But after everything I had given, I knew I couldn't let their choice take away the happiness I had found. So I walked toward the altar without them beside me. My heart was broken, but I kept moving forward because I knew my life could not be defined by the people who chose to leave. As I looked back on my life, I started to see something I had ignored for many years. It wasn't just about my wedding. The signs had always been there. I had spent my whole childhood feeling like an afterthought in my own family. No matter what I did, it never seemed to matter the way anything Desmond did mattered. I remember birthdays when my brother was handed car keys and internship offers while I smiled and thanked my parents for a card. I told myself it didn't matter because I didn't want to seem ungrateful. When Desmond wanted something, my parents rearranged their schedules to make it happen. When I wanted something, I was told the company needed the money more. School became the place where I felt I could prove myself. I studied late into the night, worked hard on every assignment, and pushed myself to get the best grades possible. When I brought home honor roll certificates, I carried them with excitement, hoping to see my parents light up. Most of the time, they simply nodded, said, "Good, good," and went back to talking about quarterly shipments. If Desmond closed one small deal during a summer internship, they celebrated for days and told everyone at the country club. What hurt even more was how differently we were treated when we made mistakes. If Desmond missed a deadline or lost a client, my parents always had an excuse ready. They said the market was difficult, or that he was still learning the ropes. But when I slipped up at anything, I was reminded I should know better. I remember one Thanksgiving when Desmond forgot to pick up the wine for dinner and my mother laughed it off, telling the table he had too much on his mind running the Eastern warehouse route. A year earlier, when I'd forgotten to confirm a caterer for my own college graduation party, my father had called it embarrassing and asked if I even thought before I acted. The rules always seemed to bend around him and tighten around me, and after enough years of watching that pattern repeat itself, I stopped being surprised by it. I just stopped expecting anything different. After a while, I stopped expecting comfort from them. Whenever something upset me, I kept it to myself. I believed that being a good daughter meant staying quiet, solving my own problems, and never becoming a burden. I became good at hiding disappointment behind a smile. When I finished college, I decided to build my own future, one that had nothing to do with the family company. I didn't ask my parents for capital or connections. I found work at a small architecture firm, learned everything I could, and slowly built a career in urban planning. Every project taught me to believe in myself a little more. For the first time, I felt proud of something no one had handed me. Then I met Theo. He listened when I spoke and cared about my work the way no one at home ever had. He never compared me to my brother or made me feel like I had to compete for love. Being with him felt peaceful. His family welcomed me from the beginning, and I finally understood what it felt like to be accepted without conditions. When I introduced Theo to my parents, I hoped they would see what I saw. Instead, they focused on his job as a high school teacher, his modest apartment, and, more than anything, the fact that he wasn't Sterling Ashworth, the son of my father's biggest business partner. My father had spent 2 years quietly hoping I would end up with Sterling, believing a marriage between our families would secure the merger he'd been chasing since the company's expansion into the coastal shipping lanes 2 years earlier. Their comments became sharper every time Theo and I visited. Soon, those opinions turned into pressure, leaving me to wonder if my happiness had ever truly mattered to them, or if I had only ever been a piece they hoped to place on a board. Only a few days before the wedding, my mother asked me to come to my parents' house because she said we needed to have one final conversation. I thought she wanted to help with the last wedding plans, or maybe make peace before the big day. Instead, the moment I sat down, I realized something was very wrong. My father stayed quiet while my mother did all the talking. She looked at me and said there was still time to cancel the wedding. At first, I thought she was joking, but the serious look on her face told me she meant every word. She told me Theo was not the right man for me. According to her, I was making a mistake that would cost the family everything they had built. She said I owed it to Desmond's future and to the company to at least consider Sterling. Her voice stayed calm the entire time, almost businesslike, as if she were presenting a proposal rather than asking her daughter to walk away from the man she loved. That calmness scared me more than shouting ever could have. I listened without interrupting because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Then she admitted something that left me completely shocked. Over the past few months, she had been meeting privately with Sterling's mother, arranging coincidental dinners and events, trying to push us together without ever telling me the real reason. At the time, I believed those gatherings were normal family functions. Now I understood she had been hoping I would leave Theo before the wedding for the sake of a contract. I looked at my father, hoping he would disagree with her, or tell her she had gone too far. Instead, he quietly nodded and said the merger would secure Desmond's future and, eventually, mine. Hearing those words hurt more than I can explain. I told them calmly that I loved Theo and that I had already made my decision. I wasn't interested in Sterling, and I wasn't going to cancel my wedding to save a business deal. That was when everything changed. My mother looked straight at me and said that if I married Theo, I would no longer have them in my life. She said they would not come to the wedding. They would not celebrate my marriage, and they would consider my choice a betrayal of everything the family had worked for. For a moment, I couldn't even speak. I never imagined my parents would put a contract above their daughter. I always believed family love was supposed to be unconditional. When I left their house, I felt completely broken. I drove home in silence, trying to understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly. As soon as Theo saw me, he knew something had happened. I told him everything through tears. He didn't speak badly about my parents or try to make me angry. He simply held my hand and reminded me that marriage is about standing beside the person you love, especially when life becomes difficult. His words gave me the strength I needed. I knew the decision would cost me my relationship with my parents, but I also knew I couldn't build my future around a merger I never agreed to. The morning of my wedding arrived faster than I expected. Everyone around me was smiling, fixing decorations, checking flowers, making sure everything was perfect. I tried to enjoy every moment, but deep inside I was carrying a weight no one else could fully see. While getting ready, I kept looking at my phone, hoping for a message from my parents. Even a short text saying they had changed their minds would have meant everything. My phone stayed silent. My bridesmaids noticed me checking it more than once and gently distracted me with something else. A joke, a last-minute fix to my veil, anything to keep my mind from circling back to the same empty screen. I appreciated it even as it didn't quite work. When it was finally time to walk down the aisle, I took a deep breath and stepped forward. Every few steps, my eyes moved toward the entrance. I kept thinking maybe they were running late. Maybe they'd surprise me by walking through those doors before the ceremony began. I held on to that hope until the very last moment. I remember the exact weight of my bouquet in my hands, the way the afternoon light came through the tall windows behind the altar, and how loud my own heartbeat sounded underneath all that music. The music continued, the guests stood, and the ceremony started. The doors never opened. I couldn't stop myself from looking at the 2 seats that had been saved for my parents. They remained empty from beginning to end. Seeing those empty chairs hurt more than I expected. They reminded me my parents had made a choice, and that choice was not to be there for their daughter. I felt tears filling my eyes, but I didn't want sadness to take over such an important day. I looked at Theo, and the way he smiled at me gave me enough strength to keep going. After the ceremony, Theo's family surrounded me with kindness. They hugged me, congratulated me, treated me like I had always been part of their family. I never felt like an outsider with them. There was no hesitation in the way they welcomed me, no sense that I needed to earn a seat at their table the way I'd spent my whole life earning one at my own. During the reception, Theo's grandfather, Osric Lindqvist, asked for everyone's attention. He stood up slowly, holding his glass, and looked directly at me. He said that family is not measured by contracts or last names. Family is made of the people who choose to stand beside you when life becomes difficult. He told me I already had a place in their hearts, and that I would never have to earn their love. He added that he had buried 2 of his own siblings and outlived most of his oldest friends, and if there was one thing life had taught him, it was that the people who show up matter far more than the people who were simply supposed to. His words touched everyone in the room, including me. As the celebration continued, our videographer quietly recorded everything. The laughter, the dancing, the joyful moments with our guests, and the moments I became emotional, when Theo gently held my hand, when friends shared stories about our journey together. At the time, I thought it was simply a beautiful memory we'd watch on future anniversaries. When the night ended, I believed the worst part of my life was finally behind me. I had no idea what my parents had been saying behind my back was about to come to light. A few weeks after the wedding, life slowly started to feel normal again. Theo and I were settling into our new apartment, and I was trying to leave the past behind. I thought the hardest part was over. Then I got a call from my cousin, Priya Malhotra. Her voice sounded careful, like she didn't know how to tell me what she'd heard. She asked if it was true that I had refused to let my parents help plan my wedding, and that I had cut them out over a business disagreement I'd started. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Now they were telling relatives that I was the reason for the estrangement, that I'd chosen pride over family, that I'd walked away from the merger out of spite, not love. Priya said the story had already made its way through 3 different family group chats by the time it reached her, each version slightly worse than the last, until somewhere along the way I had become the villain in a story about my own wedding. After the call, I opened my old messages. I read every conversation I'd had with my parents in the weeks before the wedding. There they were, one after another, invitations to the ceremony, invitations to the rehearsal dinner, messages asking them to reconsider, messages telling them I loved them and wanted them there. Every message showed I never stopped trying. Looking at those words brought tears to my eyes. A few days later, Priya came to visit. She said that after some relatives saw the messages, many of them realized the truth, that my parents had left out the most important part of the story. Priya apologized for believing the rumors at first, and I appreciated her honesty. That conversation changed something in me. I realized I had spent most of my life protecting my parents' reputation. For the first time, I stopped asking myself what I could do to earn their love. I stopped wondering how to become useful enough. I finally understood I wasn't responsible for the choices they made. Several months passed before our wedding video was finished. One evening, I sat down with Theo and a cup of tea to watch it. I was nervous, expecting it to bring back all the sadness of that day. Instead, I noticed something completely different. The camera had captured so many beautiful moments I'd almost forgotten. Smiles, laughter, warm hugs, people who were genuinely happy for us. I watched Theo say his vows with tears in his eyes. I watched Osric speak about family with so much warmth that everyone in the room became emotional. Then I saw myself, not a woman who looked defeated, but someone who kept smiling even after being deeply hurt. There was a shot near the end, one I hadn't even remembered being filmed, of me laughing so hard at something Theo's sister said that I had to hold onto his arm to stay standing. Watching it back, I realized I had spent so long dreading that footage that I had completely forgotten how much joy had actually happened that day, right alongside the grief. A few days later, our videographer, Callum Nace, called. He said our film had stayed with him, that it told a story different from most weddings he'd shot. He asked if he could submit a shortcut of it to a local storytelling festival that highlighted people who'd found strength through hard family moments. After talking it over with Theo, I agreed. I wasn't trying to embarrass my parents. I just thought the story might help someone else going through something similar. The clip was shown at the festival, then picked up by a small local news page, and within a week it had spread far beyond anything I expected, shared, reposted, commented on by strangers who saw themselves in it. Some of the comments were from people who said they had missed their own weddings for a parent, or watched a sibling get everything while they got silence. I wasn't trying to go viral. I just wanted the truth to exist somewhere outside my own head. And once it was out there, people started asking questions. Slowly, the story my parents had been telling fell apart under its own weight. Relatives who had once believed my parents began asking them difficult questions. Why had they missed their own daughter's wedding? Why did the video show so much love from everyone except the two people who should have been there first? My parents could no longer avoid it. One afternoon, my father called and asked if we could meet. I agreed, wanting to hear what they had to say. Theo offered to come, but I felt this was something I needed to face alone. When I arrived, both of my parents were waiting. I hoped for an honest apology. Instead, my mother immediately complained that people were judging them, that the video had made them look cruel, that Sterling's family had quietly pulled out of merger talks entirely once the clip started circulating. My father said he'd been embarrassed by all of it and that if I'd handled things differently, none of this would have happened. I sat there quietly, listening to them place the blame on me once again, and I remember feeling a strange kind of calm settle over me. The kind that comes only after you've cried over the same wound so many times that it finally stops surprising you. Finally, I told them I had spent my entire life trying to become the daughter they wanted, quiet, useful, easy to overlook when something more important came up. No matter what I built on my own, it never seemed to matter because they were always looking at what I could do for the company instead of who I already was. I told them the wedding itself wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was learning they'd valued a contract more than they valued me. For the first time, neither of them had an answer. My mother softly said we should forget the past and move on. My father nodded, said we were still family, said forgiveness should come naturally. I shook my head and told them forgiveness isn't something that appears overnight, and trust doesn't return just because someone wants life to go back to normal. I stood up, thanked them for meeting me, and told them I hoped they'd think about how their choices had affected me, not just how the fallout had affected them. Walking out, I felt something new, not anger, not guilt, peace. After that meeting, I stopped waiting for my parents to become different people. I put my energy into the future I was actually building. My design work kept growing, new clients came through word of mouth, and every project gave me more confidence. I took on a warehouse renovation that spring, then a small boutique hotel by the coast, and each finished project felt like proof that I could build something lasting without anyone's permission or investment. At home, Theo and I built the quiet life we'd always wanted. It wasn't the biggest apartment or the most polished one, but it was ours, and it was honest. Over time, I met other people who'd been sidelined by their families for one reason or another. A career choice, a marriage, a refusal to fall in line. I joined a small support group, and eventually shared my own story there. Instead of judgment, I found understanding. One woman in the group told me she hadn't spoken to her father in 6 years over a decision far smaller than mine, and hearing that made me realize how common this particular kind of grief actually is, even though it so rarely gets talked about outside closed doors. Those conversations changed something in me. I stopped hiding the past, because it had become part of who I was. People sometimes ask if I wanted revenge against my parents. My answer is always the same. I never wanted to hurt them. My greatest win was building a happy life without carrying hate inside it. Over time, I heard through relatives that my parents had gone quiet, that the merger had fallen through entirely, that Desmond had taken over more of the business than he was ready for, that they'd seen pictures of the home Theo and I had built. I heard my mother had stopped bringing up the wedding at family gatherings altogether, and that my father had started asking Desmond, of all people, how I was doing since I no longer answered his calls directly. Slowly, I think they understood what they'd actually lost. Not a deal. A daughter. Almost a year after the wedding, I got a short letter in the mail. It wasn't a birthday card. It was a note asking if I'd meet them one last time, promising they wanted nothing from me except to be heard. I thought about it for days before agreeing. I read that letter probably a dozen times, trying to decide if it was sincere or just another attempt to smooth things over for their own comfort. In the end, I decided it didn't matter which one it was. I owed myself the closure either way, whether they gave me an apology or simply confirmed that nothing had changed. I wasn't afraid anymore. I knew I was walking in as a stronger person than the one who'd walked out of their house the week before my wedding. We met at a quiet cafe. My parents looked older, more tired than I remembered. My father finally broke the silence and admitted they'd made serious mistakes, that they'd spent years worrying about the business instead of thinking about what their daughter actually needed. My mother agreed quietly, said they'd told themselves they were protecting the family, when really they'd let pride and ambition wreck it. There was a long pause after that, one of those silences that says more than words could, and for the first time in years I didn't feel the urge to fill it with reassurance. I let it sit there, exactly as heavy as it was. I listened without interrupting. When they finished, I thanked them for finally telling the truth, and then told them what I needed them to understand. Forgiveness isn't pretending the past didn't happen. The memory would always be part of my life. I no longer carried anger, but I also wasn't going to act like nothing had happened. If they wanted any kind of relationship with me going forward, it would have to be rebuilt slowly through actions, not promises. Both of them agreed, without arguing, without excuses. When the conversation ended, I felt lighter than I had in years, not because everything was fixed, but because I finally understood I no longer needed their approval to know I was enough. Looking back now, I sometimes think about how different that day might have felt if my parents had simply shown up. For a long time, I believed the wedding had been ruined forever. But as the years passed, I realized something surprising. The day I once thought was defined by heartbreak became the day that showed me exactly who truly loved me. Life has a strange way of revealing the truth. Sometimes the people you expect to stand beside you are the first to walk away, and people with no blood tie to you at all become the family you'd always wished for. Many people still ask about the video, assuming it mattered because it exposed what my parents did. That was never why it mattered to me. Whenever I watch it now, I don't focus on who wasn't there. I focus on the people who stayed. I see a version of myself that refused to give up, even on one of the hardest days of my life. I didn't feel strong in that moment. I was just trying to keep moving forward. Looking back, every step I took that day was a step toward a better future. If there's one lesson in all of this, it's that losing people who refuse to love you the way you deserve isn't the end of your story. Sometimes it's the beginning of finding yourself and the chance to build a life around people who support you without asking you to become someone else. I think about the version of myself who sat in that empty seat's shadow, waiting for doors that never opened, and I wish I could tell her that the silence on the other side of those doors wasn't a verdict on her worth. It was only ever a reflection of what her parents were capable of giving, and nothing more. Today, Theo and I still laugh over simple things. We spend our holidays and ordinary weekends with the people who've always shown up for us, and that has become the thing I value most. I no longer measure my life by the approval I once chased. I measure it by the love I give, the love I receive, and the family we've chosen along the way. If my story has taught me anything, it's this. Never let someone else's rejection convince you that you're unworthy of love. Your value was never up to the people who failed to see it. It took me years to fully believe that, and there are still days when the old ache resurfaces without warning. A wedding invitation with a +1 for parents. A stranger's story about a proud father walking his daughter down the aisle. I've learned not to fight those moments anymore. I let them pass through, and then I go back to the life I actually built. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If you're carrying pain from someone who walked away, I hope you remember your future is still waiting for you. Sometimes the happiest chapter of your life begins right after the people who were never meant to be part of it finally choose to leave.